Hi, I'm Nate with Average Jack Archery, and thanks for coming outside with me today. Today, we're here in the shop to build my hunting arrow for 2022. So if you're a regular follower of the channel, you know that I get really into the weeds most of the time when it comes to building and setting and cutting and tuning arrows. But that's what this video is not about. This video is about building an arrow as basic and simple as you could possibly imagine. And the reason why I'm doing this, even though I am going to have to obviously cut and insert and fletch these because these are bare shafts, these are Sirius Supernova 2.0 in 300 spine. We'll get to how I came up with that spine and length and everything else in a little bit. But I'm at a point now with owning the shop, school's coming around the corner, I'll be back in there full time and running the shop and being a husband and being a dad of 2 kids who are in kindergarten and 1st grade. I don't have the time anymore to sit at home, shoot a dozen shafts through paper, knock tune each and every single one. I would just literally pull my hair out left, right, and center. I don't have time for that. So I'm gonna build the arrows the way I used to build them when I was lazy and in college. And that is build the arrow, tune the arrow already pre-fletched by doing maybe a little bit of knock tuning to, half a dozen of them or 3 of them if I want to just make the specific hunting arrows, and just calling it good. And I know that makes some of your teeth maybe itch, it makes mine a little bit too, but it's got to be a necessity, in particular if you're in my shoes where you just don't have the amount of time right now. Yeah, could I have started back in April, May, June, this process? Of course I could have, but that's not something that I had time for. And so I just want to show you that you can achieve really good high quality results building a bell curve style arrow, as I like to call it. This arrow build last year for me came with a lighted nock and 125 grain point, came out to 466 grains, and it absolutely smashed a doe here in Pennsylvania and zipped through a buck out in the great state of Indiana, my biggest to date. And we're using the standard 12 grain aluminum inserts that come from Sirius, the standard nock, although I think I might switch over to the gold tip nocks. We'll talk about why in a minute. Not a serious problem, but a string fit problem. And then we're gonna get these cut and inserted and fletched up and ready to paper tune and hit the woods. So first things first, I'm gonna take the inserts and nocks out of the way with the exception of one, and I'm just gonna roll all of the shafts out of the way and insert with 1 nock, 1 arrow. What I like to do is I like to set up just 1 arrow. I'll take a silver Sharpie. I will measure the Amo length, and actually let's just do that right now. When you work with a spine chart in order to get the appropriate Amo length for your arrow, you go from the deepest part of the groove of the nock to the back of the point. Now for this arrow, all we're doing is adding, that extra little 1/16 of an inch out of the front of the arrow for the insert. So I'm not too worried about it. But if you are running an arrow like a gold tip Pierce or the Sirius Orion, which has a footer system, half out and then a stainless footer system, that adds length to the arrow. And the easiest way to do that is actually to not put the nock in this end, it's to put the nock in the other end and just dry fit your sleeve and post on this end. That way you can then go from this end backwards and figure out what the actual length is so you can measure on the one you want to cut off of. Now, just because the cresting is here doesn't mean you can't shoot this arrow either direction. You could actually put the insert and your broadhead onto the part that's shorter. It doesn't matter, it's just a straight carbon tube. But that'll allow for a clean look. You can then mark the Sharpie down on here with the nock and cut it backwards, but then your saw is set. You can put all the nocks in, cut them to length. That's just a little tip if you're dealing with footers and sleeves. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. Once you put your footer and sleeve in here and put the nock in the other end, you figure out pretty quick you can measure from that footer backwards, add that little, in this case, probably about 1/4 to 3/16 of an inch for that nock, and then you have your Amo length already figured out. You can cut it off at that end, put your knot back in here, put your footer and insert, you get the picture. But since I'm going with just a standard nock, and these are basically the Bohning double lock nocks, which are the same length to me basically as the gold tip standard nock. So all I'm gonna do is measure from the deepest part of the groove of the nock, and I want my arrow to be 31 inches AMO. So I'm just gonna line that up here, take a silver Sharpie, come down here, and most stock arrows are only 32 inches long, carbon to carbon at the most. So AMO length are usually 32 1/4, which is what this Sirius arrow is. I want it to cut to 31 inches AMO. So I'm gonna mark it with a silver Sharpie right there. And now I can set my saw to that, put all the nocks in, rip through all dozen shafts, and they'll all be the same length. All right, so really quickly here, let's talk about why I pulled out the arrow spinner for almost no reason and why my bow is now sitting on the table. When it comes to building the arrow like this with a spinner, you can, if you have a short enough arrow, right? I only cut like an inch and change off of this arrow because of my massive 31-inch draw length. I like to have my arrows 31 inches, my broadhead's in front of my hand, yada, yada, yada. But if you have like a 26, 27, 28-inch draw length, and you're gonna cut an arrow that's in that variety, you can take any arrow that you want. Now these series Supernovas are pretty straight from the factory, that they're about 2,000 straightness, 1.5, 2,000s. So I'm not nearly as worried about cutting off which end is the wobbliest. And particularly here, this isn't a tournament arrow, this is a hunting arrow. Deer are gonna snap these in half. I'm gonna beat living tar out of them, shooting them all summer and in through the fall. But if you have like a 6,000 or a 3,000 straightness arrow, you can put it on a spinner like this, pop the knockout, see which ends are the wobbliest, and then mark them. Say the front end's super wobbly. You can cut 3 inches off the front and 1 inch off the back to get down to a 28-inch arrow. Now you have an arrow that's almost straighter than the tolerance grade of the step below it. So if you have a 6,000, maybe you can get your way into a 3,000 straightness arrow just by cutting off the wobbly ends. Saves you some money and you get a higher quality grade arrow. Just in the sense that like Gold Tip and Victory, they all make the same arrows. It's a 3,000s, a 6,000s, and a 1,000s. They're all the same tube, they're just different straightness tolerances. So the durability is the same. The price point comes in the match sorting of the weight and the straightness, predominantly the straightness. So if you can budget your way into a straighter arrow, definitely recommend you do that. Second thing, I pulled out a gold tip knock here, and I have my Athens Vista 35. I use Wicked Threads custom strings made out of bloodline material from right here in Dillsburg, PA. And what I noticed last year when I started running these is that it really liked the knock fit of a Gold Tip Hunter standard diameter knock. And since all standard diameter arrows, which is a personal preference of why I like standard diameter over say micro and 204 diameter arrows, is that you can get knock styles from almost any brand. Victory, Gold Tip, Easton, Black Eagle, Carbon Express, they're all going to fit in that 244 to 246 inside diameter. So this is a Victory style knock at 245. This is a Gold Tip at 246. It fits in there just fine, which means if I have a knock fit here that's too loose, although that's pretty solid, snapped on well, I have a little bit of play up and down on the serving there, but it's not super easy to pull off. I can do the exact same thing by putting this Gold Tip knock on there and seeing if it's any better or any worse. And then I can really play with my knock pinch. I'm not gonna push it on all the way. Let's just see here. About the same. Also moves up and down there on the serving. So I know that I could go with either. I could go with this blue knock that came stock, or I can go with this gold tip, which is in white. I'm gonna go with the gold tip that's in white. I like that bright knock, like be able to see it when I'm practicing, even though I'll switch over to lighted knocks when I actually hit the woods this fall. All right, so let's talk about sticking that a piece of aluminum, steel, or brass in the front end of the arrow with the insert system. Now, I am a humongous fan of hot melt, and in particular, this is OMP hot melt, and you see how flexible this stuff is. Lots of rosin, lots of rubbery, shock absorption in a good quality hot melt. This isn't the type of brittle, high temperature hot melt that you would use for paper and styrofoam that you would put into a hot glue gun. This stuff is very low temperature, it melts very quickly and very easily, and it's really nice for carbon or aluminum arrows without damaging anything. However, there are certain types of inserts, and I'll get to that later, that I don't like to use this for. So that leads me to using either epoxy, a two-part system, or any type of cyanoacrylate. Now, epoxy's my personal favorite is the golf shaft epoxy made by Brampton, or the two-part epoxy that's made by Sirius. And either one of those are really good. If a golf head can be stuck to a golf shaft and handle all that torque of hitting a golf ball 250 yards, it can handle the little insert in the front end of your arrow. It has a long cure time and a long work time, but that stuff sticks water to a fish. If you don't have that kind of time and you don't feel good about hot melt, use some type of cyanoacrylate. Now, this is Easton stuff, this orange here, and this is very, very, very fast setting. It is also very, very strong, but it's very fast setting. Once you get it on and you start putting it into carbon, you better work in a hurry because it will set up with your insert still halfway out. I don't recommend this for beginners. The other possible options here, this is also made by October Mountain Products, is known as their Stuck Archery Adhesive. I use this predominantly for fletching, which we'll get into later. I really like its qualities. It has a mixture of good viscosity, but it's not too thick that it's goopy. Really, really nice, although I don't use it too much on inserts, but for kids' arrows or women's arrows, or if it's just an arrow that someone's gonna shoot in their backyard, I don't have to worry about smacking bone with a broadhead. I'll use this all day. Good cure time too. My favorite though, personally, and in particular for these styles of inserts, The Black Eagle inserts or the Carbon Express inserts that are this size, that have just little crosshatch grooves on them, I love using the Pine Ridge stuff. This has a 90-second cure time. You notice it's black. It actually has rubber into it, so it has a lot of shock absorption compared to certain other just standard Loctite cyanoacrylites. This doesn't expand, it just grips and holds both carbon and aluminum. I've really been liking this. My customers have really been liking it. It doesn't, like I said, cure too fast. You can use it on hit inserts, but you gotta work quick still, just like the Easton stuff, although it's not nearly as fast. So since we're working with a Carbon Express style insert here, I'm gonna use the good old-fashioned Pine Ridge glue. And this stuff is very straightforward to work with. It has a good viscosity. It's very goopy. Doesn't drip. So it's just a little bit of that. Like I said, I have 90 seconds here for a standard insert, and then I can give it a good twist as it's going onto the shaft like that. Make sure it gets in all those cross hatchings. Pop that insert in right at the last second, wipe off the excess glue, and that is ready to shoot in 5 minutes. That is money in the bank right there. And I will take that arrow into the woods, across the country with confidence that that little bit of glue is holding that 12 grade insert there. This is the exact same insert system that I used last year to kill my buck in Indiana and the doe here in Pennsylvania. Had zero problems with the inserts backing out. Very pleased with this and with that insert system. Hot melt on these has been fickle on Carbon Express use in the past. Not necessarily the serious ones, but it's basically the same style. And I haven't been super pleased with it, but as soon as I switched over to using this stuff, been using it for what, 6 months now, 7 months, haven't had a single complaint. So the final step in the process is to fletch the arrow. And if you think nock tuning and insert and point weight and broadhead selection is bad, fletchings is 10 times worse in my opinion. There's many different brands. You got Bohning, AAE, TAC, you have the Easton specific veins, you have Flex Fletch, you have just Q2I, just everything. Litany of different options and lengths and profile heights and colors galore. 3 fletch, 4 fletch, 2 fletch, a 4 fletch, that's 105, 75. I mean, it just, you can get off into some serious trouble when it comes to getting your arrow fletched. I like to keep it simple. I like to stick with bright colored veins, in this case all white. And this year I usually just run blazers because blazers stick to everything without a single bit of prep. But I stick to Bohning products in general, Bohning Easton products. And so I actually found these Bohning diamond veins. Now, this was the first time I ever came across the Bohning diamond vein, and I was like, where have these been? Like, what are these used for? Well, it turns out they're used for the Genesis arrows, the NASP Genesis arrows. There's a tongue twister over that one. NASP is the National Archery in the Schools program. So these are stuck to little aluminum arrows that kids are beating the absolute ever-living tar out of into big foam and cloth bales. And I'm like, if it's good enough for a kid, it's definitely good enough for me. So I decided to start running. They are very stiff. They're very slick. They're very quiet in flight, and they're not that expensive. So I ran for years the Bohning X vein, which has the more of the shield cut on the back end. That was a little bit more higher profile. I really like the look of these. I'm gonna run them and see how they handle both mechanical and fixed blades this fall. The jig here, as you see, I have set up, this is a Bitzenberger, which is arguably the most versatile jig that's been around the longest. You can use a Bohning jig, the red plastic ones, the Helix jig if you're just gonna do blazers. You can use the Last Chance Veinmaster Pro, which is the Ferrari of all jigs. You can use a Grayling. I mean, whatever you really wanna work with. But you'll notice here, on the jig itself, I have used these Cali Bit stickers, which you could find over at Lancaster Archery. These are calibrating the jig, so I can line them up on the center lines and get a 2 to 3, a 2 degree, a 3 degree, a 4 degree, whatever type of helical or offset that I want on my arrow. Now, I have also marked here on my base of my jig that I'm going to use a left helical, and for that is a 3 degree on the top and 1.5 degree on the bottom. But I have that marked as a blazer vein. I don't know what it's going to look like when it comes to these 3-inch Bohning diamond veins. Blazers are closer to 2 inches. So I'm going to line this up here in the jig. I have a mark here on my clamp that I use for standard diameter arrows here. This is a left helical jig to go with the left helical. And you can run left helical or right helical. It doesn't matter unless you're using a single bevel broadhead. And then you arguably want to make sure that if the bevel is on left of the broadhead, that you have a left helical, and vice versa, right bevel, right helical. The most common today is right bevel. But anyway, back to the clamp. I have this Sharpie line here, so that way I keep a consistent distance from the nock to the back end of the base of the vane, so I get proper face clearance. This is really important if you like to use a kisser button, because you're really bringing that string into the corner of your mouth, or if you have a lot of facial hair and you want to make sure you have that clearance. Put this into the clamp here and just see how this lines up. What I'm looking for when I look down the jig, and this doesn't matter what jig you're using, that at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the vane, I'm getting full contact on the shaft. And it looks like, it's going to take a little bit of a well-trained eye to kind of figure it out over time. It looks like we're getting full contact here. Although I think maybe I could squeak the back over a little bit more. It might be causing a little bit too much twist. Sometimes also it's good to check with more than one vane, in particular if the vane is long. If you're going to shoot like a 3.5 or a 4-inch vane or feathers in particular, you definitely want to put more than one in there to try out, because you could get some deformities there. So that is looking really good. I think I'm actually really happy with that. So I think I'm going to go with it. So I'm using here the OMP Stuck Glue. There's Goat Tough, there's the AAE, there's the primer pens. I mean, again, you could really go off into the weeds with this stuff. I like this OMP stuff. It's a good price, and it has a really good viscosity. I, for years, used just Gorilla Green Cap Gel, but it's a little bit too oozy. Like you'd squish it and just kind of go out everywhere instead of following the grooves of the veins. Then I use the Seriously Tough from Serious Archery, but it's really watery. And even though I'm used to it, it's not something I recommend to beginners, because it'll just run all over the place if you don't know what you're doing. This OMP stuff has a good mixture in between where it follows the grooves of the vane as it gets squished into the clamp, but it's not so that it will just kind of ooze all over the place. It'll hold its shape. So I like to get a little thin bead on there and then take my finger and make sure it coats the entire base of the vane. Wipe it off on this mouse pad here, which has about an 1/8 inch of dried glue on it. Push it into the back of the jig. Then I'll give it a little bit of pressure here. Glues that are cyanoacrylates like this, they set up in 10-15 seconds. So I'll sit here like this and just let that kind of seat on there. If there's a little bit of excess glue, I'll wipe it off. And it's just really a playing game of, how much glue is too much, how is too little. Don't panic if if it's your first time fletching around and you bugger the vane. The first couple arrows look like garbage. It's totally normal. Scrape the veins off, clean them up with a little bit of acetone, and you'll be right as rain. The longer the vane, or the more pronounced the helical or offset that I like to use, I leave this sit. Now, as long as you didn't use glue all over the place and get it all over the clamp, so now the clamp is gluing itself to the vane or the feather, you can let this sit here an entire day if you want. There's no harm with it. But the longer that vane is on there, the length of the vane rather, or how much helical or offset is put onto it, how much twist it has to go around the shaft, or how much angle it has on the shaft, I like to leave it on there a solid 15 seconds per inch of vane and 15 seconds per degree of helical. So if you have a 2-inch vane, that's 30 seconds. That's just on straight. And if you went with 2 degrees, that's another 15 seconds per degree. So 30 seconds and 30 seconds, just leave it on there for a minute. It's not going to hurt anything. This is a 3-inch vane. It's on a 3-degree helical. So that's 45 seconds for each 15 second per inch of vane, plus another 15 seconds for each degree. So I've got a 1.5 minutes that I want to leave this sit here in the clamp. And that's okay. It's not hurting anything as long as I didn't ooze glue everywhere. That'll just ensure that I have good bond here, even though this stuff, most cyanoacrylates set up in 15-20 seconds. I just like having that peace of mind. And what else am I going to do here? I got all the lights on. I got to fletch a dozen arrows, drink a little bit of coffee, whatever. So that's all for vane 1, and here's now going on vane 2, and I got a few more arrows to do here along the way. But if you have any questions about how we construct arrows, why we build arrows the way we do, how the hunting arrows are going for us, or if you have any questions or recommendations on an arrow build, do follow links in the description below. You can hit us up over on Facebook and Instagram at Average Jack Archery. You can send us an email, averagejackarchery@gmail.com, or you could hit the contact button on our website, averagejackarchery.com. I hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation. Build some of your favorite arrows while you're out there. And we'll get to see you next time.